fired, humiliated. Then he brought down the company. Daniel Reed was the kind of employee every manager wished they had. Reliable, hardworking, and focused, he quietly carried the weight of countless late nights and complex spreadsheets at one of New York's largest financial firms. Yet no matter how much effort he put in, Daniel never seemed to belong. Unlike his colleagues, he didn't come from an Ivy League school or a wealthy family background. He was middle class, raised on values of persistence and honesty, and in the polished world of corporate prestige, that made him an outsider. The whispers in the office were constant. Some colleagues dismissed him as unremarkable, others treated him as invisible. But Daniel endured it all, believing that results and integrity would one day earn him the respect he deserved. That belief shattered in a single moment. When an internal scandal erupted over hidden losses, Daniel found himself trapped in the middle of a storm he had nothing to do with. Fingers were pointed, and without warning, the blame landed squarely on him. Overnight, he was forced out in the most humiliating way possible. His reputation collapsed, his career vanished, and the trust of even his closest family members began to erode. In the weeks that followed his dismissal, Daniel found himself consumed by despair. He replayed every meeting, every email, every number he had checked twice, wondering how his career could end with such cruel injustice. Then one night, while reviewing old files on a forgotten hard drive, the truth began to reveal itself. Buried deep in the spreadsheets and internal reports were inconsistencies that could no longer be explained away as mistakes. The very colleagues who had pointed their fingers at him were in fact the ones who had hidden the losses and manipulated the financial reports. For a moment, Daniel thought about fighting back openly. He imagined storming into the office, confronting them, or even filing a lawsuit. But he knew how the system worked. Powerful people had powerful lawyers, and the company would silence him with endless technicalities. Outrage alone would get him nowhere. So Daniel chose a different path, a quieter one. Patiently, he began gathering evidence. Every email, every altered figure, every hidden report became part of a puzzle he carefully assembled. He did not seek sympathy or attention. Instead, he sought truth. Once the case was airtight, Daniel reached out in secret. He shared the data with a seasoned investigative journalist and later forwarded the same package to the financial regulators. No threats, no dramatic speeches, just cold, irrefutable facts placed in the right hands. It was the beginning of his silent revenge, a strategy that promised not just personal justice, but the possibility of exposing a corruption much larger than himself. While Daniel quietly pieced together his silent revenge, life inside the firm carried on as if nothing had happened. The executives who had scapegoated him continued to sip champagne at corporate events, boasting about their success and congratulating themselves on keeping the scandal under control. To them, Daniel was forgotten, just another casualty of the high-stakes corporate game. For Daniel, the memory was harder to escape. He remembered the boardroom meetings where fake smiles masked hidden agendas. He could still feel the sting of the dismissive glances, the whispered jokes about his background, the way colleagues had smirked as if his downfall was inevitable. Each moment replayed in his mind like a cruel drama, reminding him not only of what he had lost, but of how little compassion existed in the halls of power. In those offices, truth had no value. Status determined worth, and loyalty was a currency traded only when convenient. Daniel had been judged not on his work, but on the fact that he was not one of them. That contempt, sharper than any accusation, carved deep wounds into his confidence. Yet those wounds became his strength. Every insult and every lie fueled his determination to see justice served. He no longer craved their approval or even their recognition. What he wanted was something far more powerful. He wanted the truth to rise, unshakable and undeniable, in a world that believed it had silenced him for good. The storm finally broke. Headlines splashed across every major newspaper as the scandal unfolded. The CEO and senior directors who once carried themselves with untouchable confidence now faced investigations and public outrage. Regulators dug deep, journalists revealed every hidden lie, and the company that stood as a symbol of prestige began to crumble under the weight of its own deceit. Shareholders demanded answers, careers collapsed overnight, and reputations that had taken decades to build were destroyed in days. Daniel watched from a distance. There were no victory speeches, no triumphant returns, and no applause for the man who had risked everything to reveal the truth. Instead, he chose to walk away quietly from that world of polished offices and hollow promises. He had no interest in being their reluctant hero. As he closed that chapter of his life, he understood something deeper. Revenge had not erased the humiliation or the scars of betrayal. The pain remained. But in bringing the truth to light, he had restored a sense of balance, however fragile. It was a bittersweet ending, one that raised an uneasy question. Was Daniel a man of principle? Or had he simply played his own part in the endless game of power? In the corporate world, where ambition often outweighs integrity, it is worth asking, is anyone truly innocent? Behind the polished titles and the carefully staged meetings, there are rivalries, hidden agendas, and choices that test the limits of character. Daniel's story reminds us that shortcuts to success rarely last, and that no matter how carefully the truth is buried, it always finds its way back to the surface. But the real question lies in how we see Daniel Reed himself. Was he a coward who only dared to fight from the shadows, unwilling to confront his accusers face to face? Or was he courageous, choosing a path that demanded patience, intelligence, and restraint to expose a far greater wrongdoing? His silence could be seen as weakness, yet it was also his most powerful weapon. Now imagine yourself in his position. If you were blamed unjustly, would you have the strength to walk away, letting go of the need for revenge? Would you risk everything to challenge the system head-on, even if the odds were against you? Or would you, like Daniel, choose a quieter strategy, letting truth itself become your final statement? The answer says as much about us as it does about him. I can't stop thinking about Daniel Reed's story. It's haunting how one man's quiet revenge could bring down an empire built on lies. But what stays with me isn't just the corporate scandal. It's the loneliness, the humiliation, the silent battles no one sees behind polished office walls. Was Daniel a hero for exposing corruption, or was he simply fueled by bitterness? In every workplace, there are unspoken wars of pride, betrayal, and survival. This makes me wonder how many Daniel Reeds are walking among us right now, carrying secrets, waiting for their moment. I'm torn between admiration and unease, and that's exactly why this story matters.